everyone, I'm Vaibhav Handelwal and I welcome you all to yet another exciting video from Simplilearn's YouTube channel. Today, we will talk about one of the interesting topics that are C# Web API. But before we begin, let me tell you guys we have our daily updates on multiple technologies. So if you are a tech geek in a continuous hunt for the latest technological advancement, then consider getting subscribed to our YouTube channel. And don't forget to hit the bell icon below so you never miss an update from Simplilearn's YouTube channel. Now, without any further ado, let's get started with the agenda for today's session. In this tutorial, we will first define Web API. Then, we will look at what an ASP.NET Web API is. Following that, we will go over some of the features of the C# Web API. After that, we will look at some versions of the C# Web API. Then, we will discuss the differences between C# Web API and C# WCF. Following that, we will look at some of the benefits of using C# Web API. Finally, we will make a Web API project to further demonstrate the features of C# Web API. Now, without any further ado, let's get started with our first topic and try to understand what a Web API is. An application programming interface is a set of subroutine definitions, protocols, and tools for developing software and applications in computer programming. API is an interface with a set of functions that allows programmers to access specific features or data on an application, operating system, or other services. As the name implies, Web API is a web-based API that can be accessed via the HTTP protocol. It is a concept rather than a technology. We can create Web APIs using various technologies such as Java, .NET, and others. For example, Twitter's REST API provides programmatic access to read and write data, allowing us to integrate Twitter's capabilities into our applications. We will now look at ASP.NET Web API, and after understanding what a Web API is. The ASP.NET Web API is an extensible framework for creating HTTP-based services that can be accessed in various applications on various platforms such as web, Windows, or mobile, etc. It functions similarly to an ASP.NET MVC web application, except it sends data as a response instead of an HTML view. It functions similarly to a web or WCF services, except it only supports the HTTP protocol. We will now look at some of the characteristics of a C# Web API after understanding what it is. The first feature of ASP.NET Web API is the ASP.NET Web API platform is ideal for developing RESTful services. Second, the ASP.NET Web API is based on ASP.NET and supports the ASP.NET Request Response pipeline. HTTP verbs are translated into method names by ASP.NET Web API. The following features of ASP.NET Web API are the ASP.NET Web API accepts a wide range of response data formats. JSON, XML, and BSON formats support is pre-installed. The fourth characteristic is IaaS, self-hosted, or any other web server that supports .NET 4.0 or higher can host ASP.NET Web API. Finally, the last characteristic is the ASP.NET Web API framework includes a new HTTP client for communicating with the Web API server. HTTP client can be used on the server side of ASP.NET, MVC, and Windows Form, Console Labs, and other apps. Next, we will discuss C# Web API versions. The first version of Web API is Web API 1.0. It supports .NET Framework 4.0. Then it coincides with ASP.NET MVC4, and finally it supported the 2010 Visual Studio version. The second version of ASP.NET Web API is the Web API 2.0, which we are currently using. The .NET framework it supports is .NET Framework 4.5, and it is compatible with ASP.NET MVC5 and the Visual Studio 2012 and 13. Following that, we will look at the differences between ASP.NET Web API and WCF, which stands for Windows Communication Foundation. The Windows Communication Foundation (WCF), formerly Indigo, is a free and open source runtime and set of APIs in .NET Framework for developing connected service-oriented applications. The first difference between Web API and WCF is that Web API is open source and includes the .NET Framework, whereas WCF does not. The second distinction is in Web API. The HTTP protocol is supported, whereas the WCF supports the HTTP, TCP, UDP, and Custom Transport Protocol. The following distinction that Web API supported the mapping of HTTP verbs of methods, whereas WCF did not. It is attribute-based programming model that is being used. The fourth distinction is as with ASP.NET MVC. ASP.NET used a routing and a controller concept, and WCF contracts for service, operation, and data. The next difference is that the Web API does not support reliable messaging or transaction, whereas WCF supports reliable messaging and transaction. The next distinction is in Web API. The HTML configuration class can configure Web APIs but not web, whereas in WCF, use of web to set as a service configuration and attributes. The final difference is that Web API is ideal for creating RESTful services, whereas RESTful services are supported in WCF but with limitations. Next, we will look at when to use Windows Communication Foundation. The first reason is that if we are using .NET Framework 3.5, then we use WCF. Web API is not compatible with .NET 3.5 or lower. Next, we select WCF when using WCF if your service needs to support multiple protocols such as HTTP, TCP, and named pipes. Following that, we choose WCF if we want to build services that adhere to WS star standards like reliable messaging, transaction, and message security. Finally, if we want to use the request reply, one way, or duplex message exchange patterns, then we go with WCF. Following that, we will look at when to use ASP.NET Web API in this tutorial. So the first reason to use Web API when selecting Web API is if you are using .NET Framework 4.0 or higher. The second reason to use Web API is when Web API is the way to go is if you only want to build a service that supports HTTP protocol. When creating RESTful or HTTP based services, we choose ASP.NET Web API. The final reason to use ASP.NET Web API is when we are choosing Web API which is similar to ASP.NET MVC. Now, we will look at the practical demonstration of C# Web API. We will start by creating a new project. We will use ASP.NET Core Web API. We will name it EMP API Next, we will use .NET 5.0 and create. Then we will install a NuGet package called Microsoft.entityframework.core.sqlite package. So we will go to manage NuGet package. We will browse Microsoft Entity Framework Core SQLite. We will install the latest version which is compatible with our 5.0 and install. We will press OK. I accept. And here the package is installed. We can check it in the dependency, framework and packages. Now let's get started with the coding. First, we will create a models folder to store the schema for this project. So we will right click on EMP API and then we will add a new folder called models. Then first we will create a class file. So add class, it will be a class and we will name it employee. Add. We will start by creating different properties. First, we will create a public int emp id and we will get space set. This will be a unique identifier, so we will decorate it with key this key needs a special directory. We will add system.componentModel.data annotations. Then we will add other properties such as public string name get and set. Then another one public string department and get set. And another one for the address, so public string address get and set. Now, the Entity Framework core also requires a context object class. A context object allows querying and saving data. So we will make another class in models folder. So we will add class and we will name it employee context. we will first inherit the DB context. Now we will write an object which will be the configuration for this context. So public employee context DB context options. Employee context options. This will inherit the base class options. We will write database dot ensure created. This will ensure that the database is created through DB context. Now we will acknowledge the DB set. So public DB set employee employees get and set. Now we will update the configure services in startup.cs. So we will go startup.cs, but first of all we will delete these weather forecast files and this weather forecast controller, since they might interfere with our project later on. So in the startup.cs we will go to the configure services. Here we will add services dot add DB context employee context then in bracket O equals to greater than O dot SQLite data source equals to employees.db. With this, the entity framework is done. Now we will make a repository. A repository is an abstraction layer between our application and data access layer, which is in our case the employee context. So now we will create a new folder and name it repositories. We will add an interface in this. We'll now name this interface as IEMP repository. And add. This interface will represent the operations which we will be performing on the database. So we will start with task I enumerable employee get. This task will retrieve all the employee entries in the system. Now another task employee get with an argument int emp id. This will retrieve a particular employee entry. Now let's write a task to create an entry. So task employee create with the argument as employee This will create the entries. Now task employee. Now update employee This will update the current entries, and at the last we will add task delete and an argument int emp id. Now we will create a class employee repository to add implementation to these operations. So add a class and we will name it employee repository Now, this employee repository will inherit interface i.e. emp repository we will implement this interface. We will write a public employee repository employee context and we will have underscore context equals to context Now we will write implementation for the create method. So underscore context dot employees dot add employee, and then we will add await method. So await context dot save changes async, and we will add a sync keyword here. And now we will return employee. Now let's write code for delete. First, we will use findSync method of dbset to find the entry. So var employee to delete will equals to await underscore context dot employee dot find async for emp id. Now we will use remove method of dbset to delete this entry. So context dot employees dot remove employee to delete. Then we will await underscore context dot save changes async and we will add async keyword to this. Now we will write get function here. We will use toList async method of dbset to show all the entries. So we will just write return await underscore context dot employees dot toList async and we will add async keyword Now we will write get method with an argument. So now we will use find async method to find the specific entry. So we will write return await underscore context dot employees dot find async with an argument emp id, and we will add async keyword in this task as well. Now we will write update function so context dot entry of employee dot state is equals to entity state dot modified. Then I will await context dot save changes async, and we will add async here. Now let's update the configure services in startup CS again. So here I will write services dot add scope I emp repository comma employee repository and with this the repositories are also finished. Now we will create a web API controller. An API controller is a class that is responsible for handling requests at endpoints. So let's close all these files. Now let's go to controllers and add a controller. This will be an API controller which will be empty, and we will add API controller empty and we will name it employees controller.cs and add. Here this root method defines the path where this program will end, and a controller is inherited from controller base. So now since this controller will need an instance of book repository to interact with database, so we will write public employees controller and give it the IEMP repository emp repository. We will also add the repositories Now we will create a repository Now we will inject the book repository in this constructor. Now let's write methods which will handle specific HTTP request, and these methods are called action methods. We will start with a decoration tag http get public async task I enumerable employee get employee and I will return await underscore emp repository dot get Here we are using get method to get employee data from employee repository. Now let's create new method also called getBooks. We will decorate it with an HTTP tag get tag, but this time with an argument in curly braces which is our emp id so public async task action result employees and new method get employees with the argument as int emp id and we will return await underscore emp repository dot get for emp id. Now let's implement a posting method for an employee entry. This will create an employee entry in the database. So we will have an HTTP post decoration to it. This means it will handle all post related HTTP requests. So we will start with public async task action result employees post employees which will take from body which will be employee employee. So now we are new employee will equals to await dot underscore emp repository dot create in bracket employee. Now we will use the create method to add the employee entry. So we will return with created add action in bracket name of get employees comma new emp id equals to new employee dot emp id comma new employee. Now let's write a method to update an existing employee entry. So this time we will decorate the HTTP with post. Repeat. Now let's write a method to update an existing employee entry. So we will have an HTTP tag for put. Now public async task action result and put employees with argument as int empid comma then from body it will take the dataset employee. Now we will have to make sure that argument empid is the same as the one in payload, otherwise it will return a bad request. So we will check it by if emp id is not equals to the employee dot empid then we will return a bad request. Otherwise we will await underscore emp repository dot update employee and we will return no content. Now let's write a method to delete the employee entry. So this time we will decorate it with http delete. This decoration will also have an argument in curly braces. It will has an emp id. So now public async task with action result delete with argument int emp id. First, we will check if the employee entry is existing in the database or not. So var employee to delete is equals to await underscore emp repository dot get emp id Now if it is not found, then we will return not found. So if employee to delete is equals to null, then we will return not found. Otherwise, we will delete that entry. So await underscore emp id dot delete with the argument as employee to delete dot emp id and then we will return no content. Let's try and execute this. As you can see, here are all the functions. Now let's try to run get. So we will try it out and execute. As you can see, it has no set. So now let's try and insert something. Let's try out we will give it the one. For the name, we will try Josh. For department, we will use IT, and for address, let's use Las Vegas. Let's execute it. It is working right. Now let's try to again check, and here it is. It has been recorded. Now let's try to add another value. So now we will change this EMP to name to Rahul, department engineering, and address to be India. Let's execute this. Now let's try to get this, and here it is. We have two entries now. Let's try the put method. This will update the values. So let's try here. Let's update the entry number 2. We will copy this data from here and replace it with this. Now let's change the address from India and write it more defined as New Delhi. Now let's execute this and let's try the get method for this particular number, so number 2, and execute, and here it is. It has changed. We can also try it in our initial get method. We'll execute it, and here it is also changed. Now let's try to use a delete method. We will use try it out, and we can delete number 2. Now let's execute, and it has worked. Success. Now let's try to access these entries. So execute, and here it is. We are only getting the first EMP ID equals to 1. And that's all for this demo. Let's get back to our slide. And this was all for today's session. Hope you guys found it informative and helpful. If you liked this session, then like, share and subscribe. If you have any question, then you can drop them in the comment section below. Thanks for watching and stay tuned for more from Simplilearn.
Hi there, if you like this video, subscribe to the Simplilearn YouTube channel and click here to watch similar videos. To nerd up and get certified, click here.